So here once again are all of the key people that we've mentioned in this lesson. If you can name these 20 key people in order and state the general events that occur surrounding their lives, you can piece together the Old Testament from beginning to end. Are you similar to any of these people? God used these people despite their failures, despite their background, despite their current situation. If God can use these people to impact the world, God can use you and He can use me. The key is not so much about our ability, but rather our availability. Are you available to be used by God? Are you willing to be used by God? So how can you impact your world in a God-honoring way? One way is the avenue we've already mentioned. You pray for your Megiddo. You pray for the place that God has placed you to have an influence. Another way is to truly be the person God wants you to be in your Megiddo. Be the citizen in your city who does what is right. Be the employee at your work who is honest and works hard. Be the person at your school who is kind to everyone. Be the person in your family who forgives. Be the person that Christ wants you to be in your Megiddo. A final way is to take initiative to impact your Megiddo. Begin to brainstorm on how you can reach people in the place God has placed you to have an influence. How can you start relationships with people at your school or at your work so that they too can experience God's love? Who can you take out to lunch? Who can you have a cup of coffee with? Who can you take a moment to reach out to with a phone call or a card? These are just 3 ideas to get you started. Pray, live out your faith, and take initiative. There are, of course, other ways, but I will leave you to discover those on your own. What does God want you to do to have an impact in the strategic spot that He has placed you? That's the question. Our final item of business is to fit the 20 key people onto our timeline. You remember that the timeline generally places the time of Abraham around 2000 BC. The time of Moses around 1500 BC, the time of David around 1000 BC, and the time of the Babylonian exile around 500 BC. These are approximate dates that are by no means exact. You'll also remember that in our last history snippet, we placed the 6 major geographical moves onto the timeline. So let's begin. What about the 6 key people in the book of Genesis? Where do they fit on our timeline? Adam and Noah are both before the time of Abraham, so they are before 2000 BC. Abraham to Joseph are all before the time of Moses, so they are in between 2000 BC and 1500 BC. But what about the 4 key people before the king's period? Where do they fit? All 4 people, Moses, Joshua, the 12 judges, and Samuel, are all before King David reigned before 1000 BC. So we place them somewhere between 1500 to 1000 BC. But what about the 4 people during the king's period? Where do they fit? Of the 4 people, Saul was the only one who was before David. So we place him before 1000 BC. David, Solomon, and the 39 kings of the divided nation all reigned after 1000 BC, but before the people were taken into exile to Babylon. So we place them in between 1000 BC and 500 BC. But what about the last 6 key people? Where do they fit? Daniel lived while the people were slaves in Babylon. Zerubbabel, Esther, Ezra, and Nehemiah all lived in the time period after the exile in Babylon. The prophets are the only oddballs on our list because they can be placed in more than one category. God raised up prophets during the king's period, during the Babylonian exile, and even after the Babylonian exile. Once again, if you can name these 20 key people and the basic biblical events that surround their lives, you can tell the story of the Old Testament from beginning to end. Well, guys, that is where we are going to finish this session. I will see you the next time when we study the Old Testament from 35,000 feet.